It's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah, but next week we'll get back to doom and gloom. Have no fear.
Oh, sure. All right, brother. Well, listen, it's been good.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of 2 Feet Deep. We want to thank Silverman Sound for producing all of the royalty-free music that you hear in today's episode. If you're interested in experiencing some royalty-free music for yourself, head on over to silvermansound.com. We hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Ta-da-da-da. Hello, everyone. I'm Eddie Brumley, and I'm here with Derek Markgraf, and this is 2 Feet Deep, where we explore Christian theology and topics in a fun variety of ways. How you doing this morning, Derek?
Man, I'm good. Got my coffee rolling. It's a nice, cool day outside. I got a lot to do, but I'm excited about what's in store. And I'm really excited about what you got in store today. I think it's going to be a fun one.
It is going to be a fun one. Today we are talking about retro future. And retro future, of course, is looking at the future from the point of the past. So we're going to go back and we're going to look at places and times where people made predictions about what our time would look like. And in some cases, they were a little bit ahead of the curve. And sometimes they were just completely out in left field. So today we're going to start with entertainment exegesis.
Entertainment exegesis.
Yay! Woo! And for those of you listening, Derek and I already went over some of this, so there's not going to be all the surprise element that there sometimes is, but we were talking about music videos, and of course the television channel that changed everything, MTV. And of course, that launched when I was just right on the cusp of becoming a teenager. I was a preteen. I remember just being absolutely blown away by MTV. And
Wait, it wasn't Great American Country?
Right. Well, nor did it later just become reality TV. Remember, one of the saddest things in my whole life is when MTV stopped playing music. It's like, how are you still music television if you don't play music?
Horrible. And I guess there's probably some element in there where they weren't, paying the bills and knew that they had to do something different. But, there is the MTV Classic now, and they play all the old videos. And that's the only MTV cool. I ever pay attention to anymore.
Oh, that's so awesome. Well, but here's something I found while digging around is that there was a company that beat MTV to the punch by about 20 years. And they built what was called the Scopitone boxes. And the Scopitone boxes kind of looked like a jukebox, except that at the top it had a color television. And instead of selecting a record to listen to, you would select a video to watch.
And a music video, not just a video. It was a music video.
Right, a music video. And surprisingly, there were a couple hundred of these music videos that were produced by major artists. And so the idea of the Scopitone was you'd be in the pizza place or at the skating rink, and you would, put a quarter or a dime or whatever it cost into the machine, and then you'd watch a video by your favorite artist.
Right, and this was the 60s, correct?
The 1960s.
Early 60s. So that's beating MTV by quite a bit. You said, 20 years ahead of its time. And until you sent me this article, I'd never even heard of it. I mean, it wasn't even on a radar of something that was possible.
Yeah, I know, right? That's how I felt about it when I found it. It was such a strange thing, and to find out that they weren't that uncommon, but it was mostly perceived as a fad. They were expensive. Plus, unlike a jukebox where you pick a song and then go back to your seat, you have to stand there looking like a dweeb, just standing in front of this television set. But it was it was so way ahead of its time. It was anticipating something that people really would want to have, and that is music videos, to be able to see their songs interpreted visually. And it is just so neat to think that phenomenon, really, if it had caught on, would have then been our parents' generation's moment instead of ours.
Right. Yeah. No, it's really neat. And this article, I mean, they did a great job of explaining. I read the whole thing. I just was sucked in immediately because what a fascinating thing. So, like you said, you're in the bar or you're in the pizza joint or you're in the wherever these things became super popular, and you're like, hey, I want to watch this video. Now, interestingly enough, they said that I believe there was something during World War I that even predated the Scopitone, which was the idea, but you couldn't choose you couldn't choose the song you wanted to watch. You put your nickel in, and whatever reel it was on was the reel that you watched until the end of that song. But just to even think then, all the way back in 1945, and they said those lasted out through the end of the war, I believe, and they said they kind of dropped off after that. But yeah, kind of mind-boggling that this stuff's just been hanging out there, and until yesterday, I had no. I mean, I was like just blown away, and apparently in France they were huge. In America, they didn't do real hot, and that's why we probably never heard of them. Is because they were over here and they struggled, and they had to go with gimmicks to get people to want to watch them. And like you said, there were a couple of mainstream artists, but it was mainly secondary or third, tertiary artists that were in these things over here. And I don't know why they didn't. I obviously I wasn't alive. I don't have any idea why they didn't push more mainstream artists into it. Maybe they didn't have the rights to or whatever. But in France, these were like all the rage. These Scopitone things were huge over there, and they were mainstream artists for the teens. And then apparently they had accordion instrumentalists over there that were real hot too. I guess that was more of an attraction for the adults at the time. I don't know. I was kind of thought it was weird that this was such a big deal over there, and over here somehow we missed it for 20 years. But 20 years later, MTV becomes huge. It's the same kind of concept, other than you can just sit in your house and watch it. But
But it
interesting.
is, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, it really is fascinating to think how an almost technology, uh, really could have been. I think it could have been huge. But it's funny about how things have to happen at the right moment, and how
Yeah, yeah.
missing the right moment just doesn't give you the same results.
Yeah, it was like you said, it was ahead of its time. I mean, even though depending on what part of the country you were, or not part of the country, what part of the world you were in, maybe not, because of how successful it was in France. But for here in America, it was ahead of its time. It's fascinating in this article, it even shows you the technology that was being used to get the films in the right location, how to keep the exposure correct, all that stuff. And for a 1960s mechanism, it was really kind of brilliantly built to be able to choose your selection of the video and song that you wanted to hear. But for whatever reason, it wasn't the right time. Just, I mean,
That's right.
like it was wrong. I don't know if it was the generation or it was the lack of ability to get the correct music in or whatever the case, but just the technology ahead of its time for us.
Yep. Isaiah 60, verse 22 says, "When the time is right, I, the Lord, will make it happen." And I'm taking the verse a little out of context, but the big picture of the verse is that sometimes we can want something, and it's just not the right moment for it to happen. And
Mm.
for the scope tone, it just wasn't the right moment. At least not here.
Sometimes I thank God for unanswered prayers.
Man, I tell you, we need a new feature called Derek Sings.
Yeah, because the two times people have gotten to hear it, I'm sure that that's what they're begging for.
The algorithm's going to go up, I tell you. All right, well, we're heading to what the what?
What the what?
This is where we ask challenging questions, difficult questions about the Bible, maybe things that are difficult, and thinking about the retro future and thinking about, how the past and present future are all related to each other. Psalm 139:16 says, "Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when they were yet none." Another paraphrase of Psalm 139:16 says, "You have written in your book all the days of my life before one of them came to pass." So this passage, along with maybe others that we could think of, raises the question that if God can see our future, if God has our future in His present, does that mean that we really don't have any choice as we navigate it? It's the predestination question, but probably writ large, because this isn't just about whether God picks out people to go to heaven and earth. This is about whether God picks out everything, or if God knowing everything sort of means we don't have any real choices. So
Yeah, I'm going to read just a slightly different version than the two that you did, because it says this version says, this is NIV. It says, "Your eyes saw my unformed body; all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be."
ooh, okay, so all the days picked out for me were written in the book. Okay, so if it's all written in the book, then do I get to have any choice in that?
Yeah, well, it reminds me, and I know we mentioned this briefly with each other, but it reminds me of the people who say, when a loved one has passed, say, "Well, it was their time. When the Lord says it's time to go, it's time to go. And you don't, there's nothing you could have done." And
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
I'm,
I mean,
I can't say that's entirely wrong. I don't. I mean, like, clearly, if God wills something, then it will happen. Uh, I don't know that that's the way that it works in every single case. I mean, I have to believe. I feel like God had something better in store for the death of the person who was raped and murdered. You know, I don't find any comfort in, well, God said it was her time to go, and that's the way she was planned to go out. Yeah, those are tougher for me to swallow. But at the same time, I do think that God ordains in his creation. And it's a tough concept because on one side we do know that through his ordaining, he ordained that we would have the will to choose freely. Um, and so that's equally ordained by God. But to what extent do we have freedom, Eddie? I mean, to what extent did Pharaoh have freedom?
well, it's my turn to answer this. So, and you bring up Pharaoh. So, all right. So, a 30,000 foot answer. Uh, Christianity, at least the form of Christianity that you and I, the tribe we're a part of, does not believe in monism. In fact, no real Orthodox version of Christianity subscribes to monism. And monism would mean that the only real actor in the universe is God. So there are
Right.
other characters, but God so overwhelms all the other characters that they're really not playing a part. It really is a monologue, and it really is a story about one, and the other characters aren't real characters; they're just backdrop. And when you read the Old New Testaments, you do not get a sense that that's the message it's telling us. The choices we make for good or for ill, how we respond to God, seems to actually matter. And it also seems to actually shape and determine where the story is going. Yet, in God's sovereignty, He has a plan for each of us. And even when we step outside of that plan, God is capable of redirecting history so that it still ultimately gets where it needs to go. And I think about the difference between um, if I'm playing a game of chess in which I'm the only person playing, I'm moving both sides of the board. Obviously, I am gonna. Everything's gonna happen exactly as I want it to happen, but it's gonna all happen exactly as I want it to happen because I'm the only one at the chessboard. A different level of control is somebody who is a grandmaster, and that would be somebody who has like a 2,500 rating in chess. If they play somebody like me, they can allow me to do anything I want, and they are still going to take the game where they want it.
It's it's interesting that you brought up this chess thing because you say we can do anything that we choose, but also we only choose based off what the other person decides.
Yes, we are right. Well, our actions don't happen. This is why the idea that another way of doing monism is not just thinking of God as the only actor in the universe. Another way of doing monism is to think of oneself as the only real person or the only real character. And that's not correct either, right? I mean, even just in your own home, you've got a dog, and you've got, a wife, and you've got kids, and their actions are setting up certain possibilities and probably also taking away certain possibilities for your own actions. So it's not like you, in that setting, you have all the. I mean, there are some choices that aren't possible because of the actions of other people in that house.
Right. Yeah. So we have freedom to choose, but we also are choosing in response to God. Is
That's
that
right. Yep.
what you're
Yep.
saying?
Yep. I think so. I think so. And anything
Yeah.
else we want to say about that one before we put it to bed?
Well, we've had this discussion before in a variety of different ways about the free
Yes.
will because it comes up from a lot of different angles, and
Ooh,
there's
it
a good
does.
chance we'll revisit it again in some way. But this is one perspective I don't think that we've hit is this idea of, do we die because it's our time, or do we die maybe sometimes because we made an ill-fated choice, or somebody else did an ill-fated choice. Were there things that we could have done earlier in life to prevent things that are killing us later in life? I mean, I think you have to say yes to all those answers. Of course, our choices would influence that.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to his name news game. Da 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 da. Yep. And we're sticking with the theme of retro future, looking ahead to the future. But of course, by doing that, by looking back at how other people looked back to the future. And this one, or look to the future, this one's from Time Magazine. Of course, Time Magazine's been around a long time, pun intended. And in a 1992 special issue, they devoted a whole issue to what to expect in the new millennium, but they went back decades to see what people in the past would have predicted about the future. And I just want to read some of those to you and then get your response. So this one's pretty close. In 1951, someone covering the advent of television predicted that eventually the grandchildren of that generation would no longer be able to read because they would spend too much time watching television.
Well, I mean,
There,
that's almost shown true, right?
that one's almost true. That one's true. Okay, farming for plants will primarily be done underwater, and frogmen will live in undersea bunkers to tend and keep these farms.
Frogmen?
That
Like
Yeah.
somehow
So
there was a whole nother race was gonna be created.
no, the frogmen are the old term for Navy SEALs. So
Okay,
basically, professional scuba divers.
we're
Yeah,
going
that
to
was predict.
farm underneath
They're going
water
they're going to farm underneath water. That was predicted in 1962.
in
19
'62.
yeah.
Wow, that seems a little late for such a prediction, in my opinion. Surely we would have understood that
That was,
the crop life can be drowned and does need sun.
I don't know. I don't.
I
Maybe they
don't,
pictured us all eating kelp and seaweed. I don't
seaweed.
know.
That's right.
This one was predicted in 1966. Spouses will be able to secretly control one another's moods with grouchy pills. So,
With grouchy pills.
so basically, you just
Well,
drop it
I
in
mean,
the
is that
drink.
like? I
I
was gonna
guess
say,
it's
is
like
that a
a.
is that was that an early version of an aphrodisiac?
I guess, or maybe well, maybe it was a, I don't know. Yeah, I could see you secretly dropping a pill into your spouse's coffee. I just
A grouchy pill.
a grouchy pill.
I'm
Okay,
not gonna
this
lie.
one.
There's a couple of mornings I could have used one of those for
Yeah, me
me.
too. All right, I don't have the date on this one, but oh no, okay, it was in a 1990. No, no. Let's see if I can find the date on this one. Okay, I don't see the date on this one, but tomatoes will be square. The agricultural industry, for the sake of more efficient boxing, will develop a square tomato.
So they were going to come into boxes. They were going to come in boxes, and that was going to reshape how they grow. Is that what it's saying?
I don't know. I don't know how they were planning on doing it. They were planning, because tomatoes don't fit perfectly in their little tray, so they were going to make them square so you'd have a lot of efficiency and you'd be able to stack them like a Jenga game, I guess.
Tomato Jenga.
Tomato Jenga. Look, they were shooting high for that one. Okay, this one was from a 1992 article. You will be able to feel and smell whatever is on your TV set.
Smell-o-vision.
Smell-o-vision.
Isn't that something from Willy Wonka?
Yes.
And we had to wait until the 90s for someone to predict smell-o-vision, which was in a show in the 70s and in a book written before the. I don't know if I've never read the book.
They said there'll also be a magical chocolate factory with. Oh, wait a minute. Is that copyrighted?
So you'd be able to touch it, like feel it, and smell it. I don't think we haven't quite hit that one yet.
Yeah. So those are some retro future predictions from Time Magazine. Some things that they thought would happen by the year 2000.
So basically, this is a predict the future segment for the His Name News Game. In other words, a lot of these people predict the future, and I don't think that's uncommon. I mean, clearly it's not uncommon. You gave me stuff from a bunch of different decades. There's people still today trying to predict the future of earthquakes and the end of the world. And man, that one, the end of the world is a constant prediction of everybody at the water cooler to people that are renowned scientists who study earthquakes and all sorts of things. But for me, I land at when Jesus said that he didn't even know the time, only his Father knows the time. Only his Father knows the everything, the end all, the be all. I have to lean into that. I'm going to take this verse out of context, but I'm going to do it because everybody takes it out of context. So that makes it okay, right?
Of course.
And that's the classic Jeremiah 29:11.
Yeah.
Which declares that God declares, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper and give you hope. good old graduation one, because that's when they intended it, was for graduation,
Yeah.
right?
Jeremiah said, whenever you're about to get your high school diploma, this is the verse you need to read.
You shall read.
You
But
know,
saying that, I do
yeah,
believe that God's intention for us is for what's best
yes,
for us. Sometimes I don't think we know what's best for us.
for sure.
And so sometimes we view things that are bad that end up being what's best for us, because of our limited knowledge. However, um, in the scheme of the His Name News game, and trying to pull it all together, I think that's where I land on futuristic ideals too. As much as possible, I leave it in God's hands, because
Yeah.
God ultimately knows, and I ultimately don't.
I'm
That's
looking
the
up another
best I
verse.
got.
Dude, that was awesome. And in fact, uh, I'm looking up another passage because that was very, very good. But you bringing up that reminds me of this passage from James chapter 4. Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we will go do this or that in the city, spend a year here, carry on business, make money, why you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears a little while and vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we'll live and we'll do this or that. And, we can't help wanting to predict the future, right? I mean, we always make guesses about what's going to happen. And you bring up the end of the world, and there is both a religious and a secular version of that, where they make guesses. A video came out yesterday, and it said global warming. We'll only have 2 years to save the planet, and then the whole thing's just ruined. And I'm not dismissing the need to take care of the environment or even to address that problem, but do I really think the whole world's going to go off kilter and end it in 2 years? I don't believe that. I don't believe that. But we were driving to see the eclipse, and there were some guys standing at the intersection that said, basically, I guess an eclipse was going to make Jesus come back. That we had about 2 hours to repent and get our lives right. And
Really? Wow. Wow. I mean, like, I knew that some people were going a little crazy about these eclipses, or this one specifically, I guess, because apparently they don't realize how often eclipses happen. They just don't often happen above you specifically. But across the world, they happen pretty frequently, like one every 18 months, I think, or something like that.
Yes, yes, and right, but this need to find and the patterns and decipher them. It is such a human thing, right? And I mean, if you play the stock market, you're doing exactly the same thing, right? You're trying to guess, you're trying to forecast what. I am really glad that I never did a lot with that. My wife several years ago gave me $200 to let me play with the stock market. I turned that $200 immediately into $100. It took me almost 2 years. I turned it back into $200 about a week ago, and now it's back down to almost $100 again. Meaning that I'm terrible at predicting the future. Even when it comes to simple things as to whether one or two little companies will do well. Not that good at it.
It's not your forte.
Well, and so there was a study a number of years ago. Now, it may be different now with AI algorithms or whatever, but they took the predictions of stock analysts and they compared it to a random sampling from the Dow Jones and the New York Stock Exchange. They just did a random, and then they had all the random did as well as the professional stock brokers.
I don't know why that's funny. I mean, that shouldn't surprise me, but yeah, I mean, but it does. It just shows you nobody knows the future.
Yeah, yeah,
As much as we
all
like
right.
to believe, we do.
All right, man. Well, we're going to move to eschatological AI.
Dun, 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 dun.
And I don't know if you got to take a look at this one or not. This one was
I did
another.
watch the whole video.
Isn't it cool?
Man,
We should.
yeah, ridiculous. I was I watched the first 20 seconds and was sucked in for the whole whatever 10-minute video or whatever it is. And he does a great job of explaining this. But go ahead, introduce the idea.
Yeah. So Butler in a box. So in the 1980s, before household internet, before Wi-Fi, before Bluetooth, uh, a guy creates basically Alexa. He creates a voice activated computer AI that can run your house. It can turn your lights on and off. It can adjust your temperature on your house. It can open the garage door. It can do all kinds of things. And this guy figures out how to do this. Well, so let's talk about the voice command. He beat our government and Apple to voice recognition by a couple of decades. Some of our best researchers in the country that were getting funding from the government have been working on this since the 1940s. He beats them to the punch by decades. This thing can actually recognize your voice and be commanded. Was an incredibly hard technological feat to figure out, and it wasn't figured out by other people for a couple more decades. It was able to communicate using your plug-in switch. So what it would so you plugged it into an outlet, and it could send specific frequencies through your electrical circuitry in the house, and that then would be able to specifically talk to this lamp or your television or your garage. Now you had to have an adapter, and here's why you don't probably know much about Butler in a box. Set this thing up throughout your house was about $15,000. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in the end, if you wanted it to run your entire house, then in today's cost, it would cost about $15,000.
Right, adjusted for inflation. Right. Yes, that's right.
Right.
But
now, I think when he said it originally came in the box, you had your Butler in the box, which was the main hub, and then you have two plug-in modules and so what Eddie's saying is for every device that you wanted it to function, you had to have another one of those modules to plug in so that the correct signal could be sent through your circuitry in your house to that particular box, and it would talk to that box based on how you dialed in 1A or 2A or 2C or dialed it into the Butler box. So if you were happy with one lamp, then then originally when it came out, you could get away, for well under $15,000. But who wants a Butler in a box for one lamp? Right. The idea is, what we love about Alexa is that you can walk into any room and you can use her as an alarm. She can tell you what the weather's going to be. She can turn your lights on. She can turn your TV on. Your TV, depending on if you have an Amazon Fire TV, has an Alexa built in. So isn't that the beauty of it? That's one of the reasons I have an Alexa in my house is I was so tired of getting in bed and then realizing I'd forgotten to turn off the light, and I was like, it'd be awesome just to say, Alexa, turn off my light. Yeah. And that's what started me down the Alexa track.
Yeah, and Alexa is amazing technology, but this Butler in the box. Granted, there were things it couldn't do, right? I mean, it couldn't find a song for you. It wasn't hooked to the internet. The internet was not commercially available yet, but it could turn a radio on, right? It could do that.
Yeah.
It could turn the television on. And the idea was if you bought it, you would want to eventually have your whole house ran by it. Now, it had some other limitations that we haven't talked about yet. It had a 200-page manual that was like in single type, and it was in very technical language. And the guy from Popular Mechanics that set it up to see if he could get it to work, he did get it to work, but he said it took hours and hours to figure out how to program it, and it was not easy. It was not straightforward. It took a lot of figuring out. So it would have been, if you were going to set your whole house up, it was going to take you a lot of investment. Then here's the kicker: if the power went out, it only had a battery backup of about 8-9 hours, I think it said, and then it lost all of its memory, and you would have to reset everything.
Well, it actually is 3 to 8 hours, depending on what type of battery you were using.
Ooh.
So you may have only had 3. It could be as short as 3 hours.
Wow. Yeah.
Before you were going to lose it all and then have to reprogram everything.
Oh,
Now, the guy in the video said that he was able to program his lamp in about 20 minutes.
In about how long?
In about 20 minutes.
About 20 minutes, yes.
So when he read the instructions of how to program your lamp, I mean, it was like, look, you and I both went to seminary, and there's some pretty thick stuff that you have to read through in seminary to get through it. I mean, there's some pretty dense, heavy. Even you as an avid reader, I'm sure there were things that you had to read 2 or 3 times to make sure you were understanding it correctly. This stuff, I mean, like, it would have made that stuff look simple. When he reads the instructions to you, you're like, what? What? I mean, like, it's like another language.
Oh yeah. I glossed over when he started reading it, which is, of course, what he was. That was the point he was trying to make. Is like, man, this is not very straightforward. This is very
not at all.
complex.
Not at all.
But his at the end of the video, one of the points he makes is that, oddly enough, especially when it comes to innovation, sometimes being the first kid in the pool or the first one to come up with something actually is not an advantage but a disadvantage, because you're the one who took all the risk. You're probably not going to have a perfect device, but then all your competitors are going to learn from you, improve their inventions, and probably scoop you by coming back around with something that's simpler, makes more sense, less expensive. Basically, you've done all the hard work. You've chopped all the weeds down, and now they just go in and plant the garden. And so he was talking about how it really was a great device, and it really was a great product. But again, it was ahead of its time, and unfortunately, it was so far ahead of its time that it allowed the other companies, people that were working on the same kinds of ideas to be able to basically come back and do it in a simpler, cheaper way a couple decades later.
Right, yeah. Well, and a couple of decades later is when it made sense, because by then the internet was commercially available, and that's a big, huge part of why Alexa works the way it does for us. Bluetooth
Right.
being another way to connect devices to get intel. In the 80s, we didn't have any of that. I mean, like, we were doing stuff on a disc, and the disc was, as big as my hand. The square. I don't know if you remember the big square, truly floppy discs that could actually bend. They weren't the hard discs the little hard discs that our save symbols are. The technology just wasn't there, but that's part of what makes it so amazing, is that the technology wasn't there, and he still figured out how to do it.
Yeah.
He just couldn't figure out a way to make it affordable and make it simple for average Joe to get it hooked up in a relatively decent amount of time that you felt like it was worth it. But the technology he figured out, which is ridiculous. I mean, truly unbelievable.
Yeah, it was, and I mean, the guy was brilliant. His product was brilliant. It was a brilliant product, and like you said, I mean, it makes it all the more brilliant that he found workarounds, and you can almost see him anticipating things that will be like Bluetooth and so forth. But he doesn't have that yet, so he's finding workarounds for things that he can kind of intuit are coming but aren't here yet. So he's finding workarounds, and they're brilliant workarounds. And that's what I really thought was fun about today. Because really all of our examples today were people trying to think ahead, right? Trying to think ahead of the curve and trying to think, okay, what does it mean to go into the future? What would that look like? What could it look like? And even though some of them, end up being quirky, like a square tomato. I mean, it's a square tomato, but but the fact is that creativity looks like that. Creativity looks like people dreaming new dreams, and some of them aren't going to be great. Some of them are just going to be new, and that's okay.
You want to know what the biggest disappointment of our generation is that has not come to pass, but we've seen on TV? The hoverboard.
A hoverboard, yeah, a true hoverboard,
A true
and
hoverboard. I mean, like, we've been
yeah,
waiting for that for decades now.
yeah. So there is a great video, a guy that built one that kind of sort of worked. Like it worked. It uses all these little, basically jet propelled uh, engines on the bottom of it, and but the problem is it's not super steady. Uh, it's hard to direct. It doesn't go real fast. Really, you wouldn't want it to go very fast because of the things I just said. And then, so he was trying to. So he took it to the place where they filmed Back to the Future and Marty on the hoverboard, and he was able to get around like on the sidewalks and things. It wasn't real graceful, but he was able to do that. But then when he tried to go over water, because it's jet engines or jet,
Yeah.
it just went straight down to the water. It sucked the water up or something. I don't know. I don't know if it pushed it down or sucked the water up, but basically it killed the whole thing. They spent like $20,000 on it, and going over water once just destroyed it.
Oh, the irony is so good there because remember when Marty goes over the water on his regular hoverboard, uh, I don't. It's not Biff. I don't remember what the guy's name is in the second one. Uh,
Yeah,
Needles maybe or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, and he's like, "Hey,
Pluto.
everybody knows you can't take. Everybody knows you can't take hoverboards over water." And then he pulls his out, and you know how he gets across it is that his is jet fuel. Fuel.
That is funny. That is funny. Well, so it's interesting because conceptually they know how a hoverboard should work. To me, it's sort of like the airplane. Conceptually, humans had an idea of how to fly for a long time, but there were just so many technical problems with the application of it that there were some people in as late as the 1890s that thought we would never achieve flight. I mean, because the physics behind it was just so complex, and it seemed an impossible problem to solve until it wasn't. And I mean, so at some point, they understand conceptually how to do a hoverboard. At some point, they're going to land it, and it'll be a real thing when you and I have been dead for 200 years. I don't
Right, as I
know.
say, yeah. Hopefully, it's within our lifetime. Just to even see it, it
I
would be
would love
that'd be
to.
fascinating. But
Yeah,
then again,
yeah,
isn't that why we have this entire podcast today? Is that the future is fascinating, the unknown
yes,
possibilities.
yes. And because one of the things that I was thinking about as I did this one is sometimes, especially when we get to the eschatological AI, we really talk about things that are quite frightening. And I thought, man, it'd be fun for us to have, occasionally one that is yours last week was positive, but still, we very often end up kind of in a dark ditch. Oh man, this thing's going to take all our jobs away, our privacy, whatever. And last week yours was positive, and this week mine's positive, and it's a reminder, I think, that not everything that's coming is bad, right? I mean, it's not all
Right.
doom and gloom.
Yeah, but next week we'll get back to doom and gloom. Have no fear.
Oh, sure. All right, brother. Well, listen, it's been good.
All right. We'll see you next week, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Once again, we want to thank all of our listeners for joining us today on 2 Feet Deep. If you would like to reach out with any questions or thoughts, please email us at 2feetdeeppodcast@gmail.com. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and we'll see you next time.